Hi, I'm Lisa Singer. I am the Senior Director of Events Programming at MediaPost. And this is Brand Insider BTS, where I get to pull back the curtain on some of the most successful marketers today. And with me is Sarah Reynolds, and she is the CMO of Udacity. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Lisa. It's really nice to meet you. My pronouns are actually they and them. I know this podcast is typically focused on women marketers. I am femme presenting, but I'm actually non-binary.
Yes, you know what? And I just, that's what I normally say in the beginning. I'm woman, but I'm so sorry for that. I'm still learning, and I hope that this conversation will help me learn more and others who are watching. So I appreciate
For sure.
Feel free to correct me. Don't apologize whenever you need to if I say something incorrectly. So I
Of course.
very much appreciate that.
Yeah,
Well, first of all, I have to say you're from Massachusetts, right?
I am. Yes, just outside of Boston.
Me too. I grew up in Westwood.
Oh, cool. I'm from Maine originally, so 2 hours north of here, but I now live in Lexington. And if you remember your American history classes, that's the birthplace of the American Revolution.
Yes, I do. I actually used to drive the orange and red green trolleys that drive around the city giving tours. I was one of those.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Oh, very cool job.
the trolley and giving the tour. So it was.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a good time. So, well, anyway, again, I'm really glad. I want to also congratulate you on the new position. I mean, I think it's been a couple of months since you started as CMO at Udacity.
Yeah, it's been 2 very exciting months.
Yeah, I was going to say, must be really exciting, especially coming out of, we're all starting to come back into the real world, and this just joining in again at a new company. How has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Udacity's remote first, but I've been really lucky that I've actually been able to meet a lot of my coworkers in person. We had a great series of quarterly business reviews for the North America team here in Boston, and I got to meet a lot of folks who are based here in the US. I had the opportunity to meet my head of sales who lives in the UK last week with our CEO in person. I had the opportunity to go out to our American headquarters in Mountain View and meet a lot of my team who's local to sort of the Bay Area. It's been really interesting to sort of work in this new hybrid model where you don't go to the office every day, but you get to go to the office and see people for maybe extended periods of time or a week, a month, or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. And I mean, Boston's beautiful. I'm actually going to be heading out there in a couple of weeks. So for a little downtime, but
Nice.
yeah, I'm excited. Well, you mentioned at the top that you're non-binary. Talk about that, being in a leadership role like you are. I mean, CMO, and I know that is considered, that's a rarity. Maybe we don't see as many non-binary people in that type of position. What does that feel like to you? Like, how amazing is it that you're able to do this? And what kind of, does that give you a responsibility, or do you feel like that?
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk about this topic, I often quote from a study that McKinsey did where they found that like 68% of trans and non-binary people don't feel comfortable being fully out as their authentic selves at work. And they cite concerns about physical safety and harassment, and also about like discrimination in hiring and promotional practices. A further something like 86% of them, the study found, say that they don't ever see leaders who look or seem like them. And I can tell you that, being non-binary, as a leader, like it was very much coming up, even growing up in tech, like it was rare enough to find a femme presenting leader in the room, let alone someone who identified as trans or non-binary. And I've been really lucky to meet a couple of really, great out, especially like trans leaders here in the Boston area with the rise of like the biotech industry and stuff like that. But I kind of came to the realization at one point that like, if I didn't want people to have the same experience that I did, feeling like they were on this like lonely island of, identity, then I needed to use my position, or needed to use the visibility that comes with my position, to really be open and honest about the person that I was, and about my identity, and about my pronouns, and really put some of that into practice so that I could change the way that we think about what does leadership look like, not just at Udacity, but across the whole industry or even across the world.
Yeah, no, and it is important. I mean, obviously, Udacity completely embraces you, and you are completely open and be able to be honest about who you are. But Was there a time when you were just starting out that maybe you were afraid to be open, that you didn't know necessarily how people were going to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, pronouns are a really good example. For a very long time, even after I was out as identifying as someone who's non-binary, I had in my email signature like she/they or they/she, right? I kept the she, her pronouns as part of my, especially like work practice, much longer than I kept them in my personal life. The reason I did that was because I honestly thought that, like, if I ask people to use the pronouns that I actually use in my personal life, the they and the them, that it would detract, or they would like focus on that element of our conversation as opposed to what I was saying or the content of my character. And in living that life where I was, open about my identity, but I used a different set of pronouns at work, or I accepted a different set of pronouns at work than I did at home, I found that, like, really you can't divorce the content of your character or your identity from the language that you use to speak about yourself, or that others use to speak about you. And so I actually went through a process at a previous role where I actually engaged with our DE&I team and had them send a communication about the fact that I was changing my pronouns. And really, I was just using the pronouns that I was using already in my personal life every day. But I was, asking folks to change the pronouns maybe that they had used for me for the last couple of years that they'd known me as a colleague or a friend or a coworker. And that was really interesting, because I think that it really allowed me to like live much more authentically as myself, and really embrace that identity in a more holistic way, even if it meant that I had to navigate slightly different conversations than I had previously about how my identity played into, the language that we use or the way that I show up at work.
Right. Well, and I think, I mean, even what I said at the top of the show, that those conversations are important. I mean, that is something that, and I think for someone who, as I said, I'm still learning, and the pronouns, I have to think twice and make sure
Yeah.
I say correctly. But I'm someone who will just ask, like I just, whatever it may be, not just about that, about anything, I kind of have that, whatever, because I know it's not coming out of any anger or meanness. It's just, I want to know. I want to know. So sometimes I'll ask things, and even my friends are like, maybe that shouldn't ask that. But it's always been taken well, because again, it comes from the heart. It's me wanting to help. How can someone, because yes, there are those biases, and as you mentioned, that people can get hatred at work or not get promotions, and that's horrible. I don't know how much you can talk to them, but for someone who is more wanting to understand and really know how to speak to you correctly and not do something that might be offending you, what do you say to them? How did they sort of approach that conversation?
Yeah, so the first thing that I always tell people is you don't have to worry about offending me if you get it wrong. My friends and family will tell you that the person who misgenders me, meaning uses the wrong pronouns for me, the most, is me. I get the least amount of practice talking about myself in the third person. And even, my best friend recently adopted they, them pronouns and came out as non-binary. And I'm one of the people who struggles with it the most. And you would think that it would be second nature. But it's really just about like retraining your brain away from, all of us do it when we're English language speakers. You meet someone for the first time, and without even thinking about it, it's really in your subconscious, you assign a set of pronouns to them. And really the purpose of the exercise is just to retrain your brain away from the idea that there's like an obvious answer to what someone's pronouns might be. So someone who's named Lisa would just as likely in today's beautiful modern age use she, her, they, them, he, him, ze, zer, no pronouns, set of pronouns you haven't even heard of yet. As they would the pronouns that your brain would automatically maybe assign to them based on their name or the way that they look physically, right? So I always say, the best thing that you can do is just to ask. So when you meet someone for the first time, it's just like you would ask how to pronounce their name if you were unsure. You ask what their pronouns are. And I think the more that we can practice making it an everyday, like non-threatening part of our normal conversation, the better that we're all going to be at maybe retraining our brain and moving beyond that like subconscious assumption that we make.
so I can tell my friends that I'm right in doing and asking questions. Leave me alone.
Absolutely. I would say, like my family and friends will tell you that they love gamification. So they make us play on what we call hard mode. So like if you mess it up, you owe me $1 or a compliment. So if you're someone who is more motivated with like games, or you're more motivated to like have there be some sort of incentive to get it right, I can definitely suggest hard mode as a fun way to practice with friends and family.
Yeah, no, I definitely will keep that one in mind. Well, I want to talk about your when you started out. I mean, okay, because I think it's kind of interesting. All right, so you graduated from Hamilton College,
Mhm.
Lottie. Am I saying that right? Lottie, whatever. But you have a BA in history and classical studies. You even studied
Yes.
abroad in Italian history. Um,
Yes.
but yet your first job out was in a tech company. So I'm just curious,
Yes.
how, like, what were you, when you were in college, what were you foreseeing? What did you envision your career? And even as you first graduated, because it seems like you weren't on that marketing tech track in college, but then of course your career shows that you are. So talk about your path and sort of there and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, so it's even weirder than it probably looks if you're like stalking me on LinkedIn.
Please,
So
I fully acknowledge that.
Oh, I love that. I do it too, right? We all do. I come from a family that's like very STEM education oriented. My dad's an electrical engineer. My mom went to MIT for biology. My sister's a veterinarian. I always tell people that I made them really nervous because I was the black sheep who wanted to study history and classical studies, which is more history and dead languages. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I was doing that type of study in college because it was something that I was really like interested in. It really made my brain tick, and it taught me a lot of like really interesting critical thinking skills. I then decided that I would double down on making them nervous. And I would say, throw away that fancy degree. I want to go to culinary school. I took on a couple of jobs working as a private chef. I worked a little bit in the industry. I went to culinary school part-time. And what I found was that wasn't really a fit for me either. I have some like physical limitations that made it really difficult to be on my feet that many hours a day. And while I love to cook, it's more of like a stress release than it was ever going to be maybe a full-time job. So I was fortunate enough to be, going to culinary school part-time. And my dad actually worked in Boston, and he worked in an electrical engineering startup. And one day, unfortunately, their office administrator had a medical emergency, and she had to be hospitalized, and they needed someone to come in and pinch hit. And he knew my social security number. And so I had the job part-time while I was going to school. Long story short, I ended up leaving culinary school. It wasn't for me, as I said. And I ended up taking a job in business development with a really small startup. They were like 10 people. And we had one person who worked in marketing. And one day that person left the company. And I can remember the CEO came over to my desk and said, I don't know, you seem smart. I'm sure you'll figure it out. And that was how I ended up in marketing in tech, basically by accident. I didn't really know anything about marketing. I hadn't done an MBA or any sort of like marketing work in college. I went to a liberal arts school, right? I was much more interested in learning ancient Greek than thinking about economics. And I really had to learn everything on the job or through like online skills training, or, through my coworkers, or by asking questions, or like doing that typical millennial thing where someone asks you to do something and you confidently say yes, and then you scurry out of the room and you Google it. I did a lot of that, and that was very successful for me. And it turned out that I loved marketing because it put a lot of that same critical thinking work to the test that I had really enjoyed about like history, or even figuring out like how did dead languages work. And I ended up just loving it, and having the tremendous opportunity to grow my career in marketing and in tech, primarily here in the Boston area.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, I'm sure your parents were like, okay, now we have her. We brought her into the fold. She's one of us
We brought
now.
them into the fold.
Yes. But I mean, do you feel like, I mean, obviously look at your career, it's amazing and where you are today. So tech ultimately, I want to back up a little bit before I get into that. What I love about your story is that you jumped in and you basically just kept, okay, I'm going to keep doing it and keep, Googling it or asking or whatever. And that, I think, is a lot of people, especially maybe women or men or binary, or, and again, am I like messing up what I'm just, I like, as I said, women.
No,
I'm so used
guys,
to
gals, and non-binary pals alike do that.
people in general.
Yes, people in general
don't necessarily, if they don't have that expertise, they kind of back off, or they feel like they can't. And you didn't do that. What gave you that courage and that strength just to be moving forward? I mean, obviously there must have been some missteps along the way.
Oh, for sure. Googling it is not a foolproof solution to not knowing what you're doing. But I like when I mentor people, I always talk about how, like, whether you're in a bar or you're in a work setting, like, human beings are attracted to confidence. And they're also like not always great at knowing when your confidence is real or fake. And so one of the things that you can do to your advantage is to be confident and not overconfident and not arrogant, right? Like, you don't want to be that person, but there is a level to which you can like overcome maybe some of that like imposter syndrome that I know I have, or that self-doubt that comes along with like, I don't really know what you're asking me, that can be overcome by pursuing some sort of education on your own to be able to show up and confidently say, like, yes, I've been asked to do a marketing strategy for the first time. I've been asked to think about go-to-market strategy for the first time. I've been asked to look into SEO research for the first time. I've been asked to whatever it is, that you can confidently say, like, I'm going to figure that out, because you know that you have the underlying like research or critical thinking skills that are going to enable you to maybe digest some information, look at some research, listen to a podcast from an expert, maybe, take a Udacity course, like do whatever it is that's going to work for you and work for your learning style, to be able to confidently say, like, hey, even if I don't nail it on the first try, like I know enough to be dangerous, I would say, about like this topic, that I think I can take a stab at that.
Right. Like, I mean, obviously, so if someone says, hey, I want you to be a surgeon. Okay, maybe that you don't say, oh,
that's not the thing to Google.
in your, wheelhouse, then
yeah, absolutely.
say yes, and then figure it out, but then ask questions. And so, and really moving forward that way, being open to learning.
Yeah, and fail fast, right? Like there are situations where you should feel comfortable, failing, or should feel comfortable saying, hey, I don't know what I'm doing and I need a mentor, or I need a coworker to show me, or I need someone who I can rely on to ask for a second opinion, right? But you should also feel comfortable like, hey, I'm going to take a stab at this. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to take another stab at it. And if that doesn't work, like, okay, I'll take a third. Like, and maybe there's a limit to how many tries you can have to crack that nut. But I think that, you get better over time with practice, even if it's not exactly what someone was expecting. I think that's really helpful. And it can lead to a lot of like new insights when somebody's coming at a new role or a new idea from a different perspective of not somebody who's done it 1,000 times.
I'm curious, was there ever a setback in terms of your career, or maybe even just in life, that seemed horrible, but then ultimately well, before even getting into, I like to usually ask the silver lining, but I don't want to ask the silver lining for this. I want to say, and how did you get past it? How did you overcome whatever that challenge was? Maybe it knocked you on the ground, but then it was, you moved past it in some way.
Yeah. I would say that, we talked about my identity at the outset and how I made that change to go from, accepting the she, her pronouns that people, use for me when they meet me for the first time, and they do that subconscious process of assigning me pronouns. Right. And I mentioned that I actually undertook a process at, a previous role to go through a transition in the workplace to say, hey, I'm moving to the pronouns I use in my personal life. Part of the reason that happened was I actually, I got a new boss, and, he wasn't someone who was comfortable with that conversation. And in fact, I said, hey, I know in my email signature, it says they/she, but I actually at the time I used the language, I prefer the they, them pronouns. And now that we work closely together, I would really like for you to use them, because it's something that I ask of the folks that I directly report to, or the folks who directly report to me, because we work so much closer together. Then that it's important to me that, you know, you respect this part of my identity. And he sort of gave the feedback of, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm older. I don't see the world that way. I don't think I'm going to learn that, and I don't see the value in it. And I have to tell you that of like all of the professional interactions in my life, that was one of the hardest to keep my composure through, especially because I think it really drove home in that moment, like how inextricable my pronouns and the language that people use to talk about me can be, like from the rest of my professional identity. And I think in that moment, I realized like, okay, this isn't actually optional. Like I have phrased this as the pronouns that I prefer. I'm actually trying to practice not using that language when I ask people about their pronouns, because it's not the pronouns that you prefer, it's the pronouns you use, right? And they are inextricable from the way that you view yourself, or the language that you use, right, to describe yourself. And I think that like that really taught me a lot in that moment, like looking back at it, you know, with some like time to process what happened there. It taught me a lot about how important my identity was, but it was also incredibly challenging. And navigating the rest of that conversation, because it wasn't the only thing that we needed to talk about in that one-on-one that day, was one of the most difficult, you know, like professional challenges that I've had.
Well, I'm curious how, you know, he's your boss. So how did you stay with the company, or how did you get past it so you could not, you know, so you could feel comfortable about what's happening and how you're being treated?
I was really lucky to have a strong, you know, HR partnership where, you know, we were able to maybe work together to educate him and educate everyone about like why, you know, going through this transition, why, you know, using someone's pronouns correctly is so important. I was really lucky to have a team who, you know, obviously thought that that was not the correct response, and who really wanted to support me through that transition. And to your point about silver linings, like I think one thing that taught me, and one of the reasons that I talk about my identity so openly now, is that when I started that process, I was one of the first people to ever go through any sort of transition openly at work. And what I found was when I did that, it was really difficult, and I learned a lot, and, you know, it was a big change. But all of a sudden, I went from being the only non-binary person that I knew who worked at that company, to having a friend who was trans and openly trans at work at that company, and having a friend who was now openly non-binary at that company. And seeing like that cascading effect really drove home, I think, for me, you know, how do I even like in a bad situation, like how do I decide what I value, and how do I decide like what I will accept and what I will not accept, and how does that help not just me, but everyone who has to navigate this situation going forward, so that nobody has to have that same experience that I did.
Yeah, no, and I mean, so someone now again, and it sounds like you were in a position that was maybe more in the, I mean, you weren't CMO, you weren't in at the level you are now. I don't know.
Right.
Were you more middle at this time, or like, so what made you, like, for someone just starting and you know, who wants to be open, but at the same point is afraid, you know, oh, will I lose my job? Will I be treated differently?
Yeah.
Not get the promotion?
Yeah.
How do you suggest, like, what would you recommend to them in how they maneuver their career? Do they wait till they get to a higher position, or do they need to talk now?
I mean, I personally think that I waited too long. Like I have to live with that choice that I made. And it's only a choice that I can make, right? Nobody, me included, no one can tell you when the right time for you to come out is, or which arenas you should be out in, right? I know people who work in really conservative environments where it's not safe for their mental health, or even sometimes their physical safety, to be open and honest about the person that they are outside of work when they're at work. And they choose to live their open, authentic self, you know, that life. They choose to live within the four walls of their house, or within the safety of queer spaces or the safety of their friend groups, or the safety of their personal life, but they don't choose to bring it to the workplace. And the only person who can make the decision about whether or not that's right for them is them. But I always say to people, especially like younger non-binary people, there's a big conversation now about like women in STEM or STEAM, or there's a big conversation and there's all these resources for women in marketing, or there's all these resources for women in tech. And there's a conversation about how we need to do more to support the diversity, of our employee populations that reflects the way that the outside world looks, right? That happened because there were trailblazers, and only you, again, can decide if you're someone who feels comfortable playing a trailblazer role, because it's a lot of work and it puts additional stress and additional requirements about education or additional, work on your plate, right? It does, you have to be willing to take that on. But also you have to recognize that you have the unique opportunity to be that person for someone else. And ultimately, if you choose to do this, you could help folks like me hopefully move the conversation about trans and non-binary employees away from a statistic like 68% of us don't show up and be out and full and our authentic selves at work, and into a realm where, hey, maybe that's the minority of people, or hey, maybe that's it'd be great if that were no one at some point in the future. We're not there yet. And it does mean that you have to join the 32% of us who are living authentically and dealing with the challenges that come with those things. But, I often say, like, if it's something where, you feel like it's specific to your current working environment, like the Great Resignation is here, baby, like you can make a change. And that's obviously, that's a glib way of phrasing that, because not everyone has that access or those opportunities to make that change. But I do think for a lot of us, especially when you're knowledge workers, and especially when you're looking at, opportunities early in your career, you could work anywhere. You could work in any industry. You can learn these new skills that we're talking about and get a job that really, hopefully mirrors the type of culture that you feel comfortable in.
Yep. No. And again, as you said, maybe, it's all individual, and it's not trying to put judgment on anyone who is, maybe not being honest or not honest, but open at work. But I want to know, because going into that, because you obviously are a trailblazer, you are stepping up for people. So as hopefully now the ones coming up, the non-binary people who are coming up now, they'll find an easier path and or at least feel more, they see themselves. But I'm curious, I read that, being in my stalker mode, an article that you mentioned that inclusion and belonging is sometimes more important than diversity. And so I'm curious what you mean by that.
Yeah, for a long time, especially in, tech or employee experience, we talked about diversity and the importance of diverse hiring practices, or the importance of diverse workforces, or how diverse teams are good for business, right? Like they drive more innovation. It's been proven again and again than teams who are homogenous. And diversity is one aspect of the way that you think about the bigger picture. And the bigger picture now includes things like equity, inclusion, and belonging, all of which are, come in partnership with just creating an environment where you're pulling in diverse talent. For example, if you hire a bunch of diverse talent, but you don't make them feel included or don't give them a sense of belonging at work, they will take advantage of the Great Resignation and they will look for a place that does, right? It's really critical to not just think about like diversity as a checkbox, or like something that you like accomplish, like, oh, we hired, enough underrepresented, enough, that's terrible, underrepresented minorities, right, to meet a quota. That's not what this is about. This is about like fundamentally changing the way that we approach work, the way that we approach relationships, the way that we approach what success looks like or what leadership looks like. And it really requires us to change a lot of different aspects of the way that we hire, the way that we think about employee engagement, the way that we think about, creating that sense of belonging at work, and the way that we think about retaining employees, because people who come from different backgrounds, they value different things in their work experience, and they'll they'll advocate for different things, or different things will contribute to their sense of belonging in your organization. And not every company is on like a really really far along that maturity curve. I think there's a lot of work to be done in all companies of every size to be able to really make sure that we're not just thinking about quotas, we're thinking about true inclusion and belonging.
Well, and just as you said, getting everyone to understand it more, and that needs the conversation and
Absolutely.
come within the organization. And I mean, obviously it's important for any industry, but going back to marketing, I mean, marketers are trying to reach everyone. It's a huge group of people, different backgrounds, and it makes the most sense to be inclusive as a marketer with the people who are working with you. So then you're getting all of those different ideas and opinions, and knowing so it gives you more uniqueness when you're creating, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. The research into diverse teams will tell you that they take longer to gel, like as a unit, because they can't read each other's minds. They're not all the same, right? Like it's harder sometimes for them to relate or find consensus, right? Because there are so many different ideas, but ultimately that those ideals contribute to, better innovation, faster growth, like all of this great, company performance, like economics type conversation. Never mind the fact that it's like good for the world, that we are all exposed to different viewpoints, that we include people from a lot of different backgrounds, that we change the way that we think leadership looks like to be able to include those folks, right? But it does take active practice, and it takes mindfulness, and it takes work to make sure that you're saying like, hey, I genuinely believe that we should all be heard, that we should bring all of our diverse perspectives or lived experiences or backgrounds or whatever it is to the table in this conversation. And ultimately we also do need to reach some sort of consensus about what the path forward is. But yeah, I mean, marketers are trying to reach diverse buyers, right? Buyers look like me now, like sorry, there's a lot of research that goes into things like the buying power of the LGBTQIA plus community, and how they tend to have a higher level of education than maybe some of their straight peers, right? Or they tend to be in like dual income houses more frequently than some of their straight peers. And there's a lot of things that you need to think about when suddenly you're not thinking about just your target customer as like one very specific mold, but your target customer suddenly, represents that beautiful diversity of the world around you.
Yep. No, it's, I mean, aside from being the right thing and what we need to be doing, if you want to go to the bosses that you had, like that kind of, it's also good business, I mean,
Exactly.
both ways. I have to sort of diverse from that. And I want to ask you what your guilty pleasure is. What is something that
Oh boy.
you don't want to talk, maybe you don't tell people or whatever, or maybe you do, but it's just you go to it even though it's not maybe the best thing for you.
So I try not to call it a guilty pleasure, because I try not to like self-shame about it, but I love like reality dating shows. Like I call it brain candy. Like a lot of us work in roles where we solve complex problems, we talk about heavier complex topics, we spend a lot of time like deep in thought in our work, and sometimes you just want to like disconnect and like engage in some brain candy. So I love like Love Island or The Bachelor, or like Too Hot to Handle, or like whatever Netflix is putting out, The Ultimatum, this month. Like all of that stuff is so incredibly like wonderful for me to spend some time with, just sort of like turning my brain off and maybe taking a little mental break from reality.
Well, I have one for you to try. Cosmic Love. It's on Prime.
Oh.
I recently interviewed the astrologer who.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And they inspired this this reality show. I have to say, I'm not, I'm my background reporting and working for entertainment news. And I used to like I'm not covering reality. Like I would try to watch and I'm not a reality person. Although I get it when you put yourself watching it, like you get sucked in. So I do understand that. I just, part of me is like, I can't. But that said, I did watch Cosmic Love, and I really enjoyed it. It was good. Like it was, it definitely has potential. So might be something.
I caught your interview with her, and I learned so much about twin dynamics. My dad's a twin, and there's lots of twins in my family tree. So I thought that was super interesting to hear.
Is he identical or
fraternal?
Yeah, okay,
A boy, two brothers, but they're fraternal twins.
okay, yeah. Obviously, since you watch, I have a brother twin. But so very interesting. Anyway, for your reality guilty
I'll
pleasure,
put it in my queue.
guilty pleasure for your reality
Yeah.
pleasure, you'll have to check it out. Well, also, I wanted to ask you: has there ever been a word, or what? Well, not even just a word, not even like I don't know why I said word. What have you maybe at some point, or maybe right now, you feel like you wish you unlearned something? What would you like to unlearn?
Ooh, unlearn? I mean, like back to the previous comment, like if I could somehow remove like all of that reality TV trivia from my brain, imagine the space I could free up. I think so like I joke, like I can't sing, I can't carry a tune, but I know all of the words to like every top 40 pop song that has like ever come out in my lifetime. Again, like if I could unlearn that, like that knowledge is not really doing anything for me, to be honest. Imagine the brain space that I could free up to like work on something more interesting. But it does make me kind of like an interesting, I don't, it's like a party gimmick. Like, but that I think I would maybe like use that for other things.
That's like me with Christmas songs, Christmas carols. I
Yeah.
sing them all. We grew up Christmas Eve. My cousin brought down the guitar and would sing Christmas carols, so they were in my head always. And but people are always just like, "How do you know every word to all these songs?"
Yes.
So maybe that would be something because I could use some more space up there. So that might be my unlearning. But well, Sarah, thank you so much. This has been truly a pleasure. I really appreciate you um, taking the time to talk with me and being just share with me and help me to understand things better. I really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, of course. This has been such a joy to chat with you. I hope we get to touch base again and explore some of these themes more thoroughly in the
Yeah,
future.
I would love that. So, and thank you for watching. Again, I always ask if you have a marketer that you would love for me to profile, just please let me know, send me a note, and I will do my best. And again, thanks, Sarah.